Hello and welcome. This is Cheryl. Thank you so much for joining me today. Today I'm going to do a magic embossing tutorial with interference inks on a white background. I recently did a video with these cards and I did a black background with them, and there was a few questions with the interference inks. A lot of people didn't really understand what they were doing. And what they do is they appear differently on white cardstock than they do on black. So I'm going to take a moment at the beginning of this video to show you how these inks look on white and on black. So that first piece there, I just took some black soot distress ink and put it on half of my piece of cardstock here. And then I'm going to go through each one of the pads that I'll be using in this video and show you what they look like. So the first one there was fruit salad. The second one here is sapphire gold. And then we have crushed velvet. And these are the three that I'm going to be using on my embossed balloons card. Next, we have tropical paradise. And then we have summer garden. And these two I'm going to be using on the flowers background. Now you can see how they look different on the black part of the cardstock than they do on the white cardstock. Now that's part of the fun of these inks. And I like to play with them within the same technique, showing how they look on the white cardstock, or the white as well as the black, because I just think it looks like magic. The way that they look, the one ink pad looks different depending on the background. That's the magic part to me. And well, you really can't convince me differently. Anyways, I chose the three for the balloons because they all had a bit of a goldy colored interference look on the black, and I thought they would coordinate nicely together. So before doing anything else, I need to emboss my backgrounds. I put some embossing powder tool on the white cardstock before putting it into my embossing folder, and I'm taping it into my embossing folder so that if and when I want to do this again, I know that that cardstock is not going to shift. I have some Versamark ink here, and I'm brayering it onto that embossing folder. This is a 3D embossing folder, but it's not very deep. So if I were to just press that pad into it, I would likely get it on the balloons. And to be honest, I did this technique without doing that brayer part, and I got it all over the balloons. So better to use the brayer because it's only going to go on the flat surface. Now, when I taped my paper in there, I taped it on the part, or on the side where the balloons were raised, so that when I do my brayering, it is on the side where the balloons are recessed. Now on that Versamark ink, I'm going to put some clear embossing powder, and this is how we're going to keep our background white. That embossing is going to protect that white background, and any ink that goes on there, I'm going to easily be able to just wipe it off with a dry cloth. You could try to do this technique without embossing the background, but you're going to have to be a lot more careful with your ink blending. And the other thing is the embossing gave it a really cool texture. It wasn't completely smooth. It was a little bit bumpy, but also glossy. And I really like the look of that white background with that glossy, bumpy texture against the smooth balloons. Once I have my powder on my background, I took a brush there and I brushed off any that showed up on the balloons or that stuck to the balloons that I didn't want to be there. That way I have clear or some bare cardstock on my raised balloons to do my next step, which is the ink blending. So I need to use that embossing tool over my whole background and make sure that it's completely embossed before moving on. And I'm going to emboss both backgrounds first and then do the ink blending together. So that first embossing folder was called Floating Balloons, and this one's called Flowers and Foliage, and it's also a 3D embossing folder. And just like the embossing or floating balloons, the detail isn't super deep because it's quite tiny. So I'm also going to use that brayer with that Versamark pad and brayer it onto my background here. Now the cool part of this is once you put it through your machine, you can see where that ink is. It gives a little bit of a glossy sheen to the cardstock. So if you wanted to do it again to make sure to get all of the areas, you absolutely could repeat this step again, brayer the ink on and put it through your machine again. There was a few spots that were not inked, but I actually kind of liked the look, so I ended up not going and putting it back in again, but you certainly could if you wanted to. Once I have that done, I'm going to repeat the step with the clear embossing powder. I put my folders to the side. I am going to clean them off with some soap and water, make sure all of that Versamark ink is off there. Versamark ink tends to be a little bit sticky, so just plain water isn't going to be enough just to get it off. You could also use stamp cleaner if you want, however you want to do it to get all of that ink off. I always want to make sure that those folders are clean for the next time I use them so I don't have any surprises. Now I'm using my embossing tool to melt all of that powder, and you can kind of see that it gets a little bit of a slightly different shade than the bare cardstock, so you can see where that powder is, and then when you tilt it in the light, it has a really nice gloss to it. So with that completely done, and once again you want to make sure that all of the areas are embossed, I'm going to take a detailed blending brush and some black soot distress ink. Now this step will work with any ink that you want to do that is either dye or permanent ink. So I'm using a dye-based ink here. You could use a permanent ink here. The only thing that I wouldn't necessarily use is a pigment ink, just because you'd have to heat set it. But if you wanted to do that step and heat set your ink, you absolutely could. Periodically, while I am putting that ink down, I am taking a soft cloth and I'm just wiping off any excess that goes on my embossed background. I could wait and do that at the end, but likely I would put my finger in it and then smear it somewhere I don't want it. So easy enough to just do it while I'm working. And all I'm doing is putting kind of a shadow around each one of those balloons. And then for my floral background, I put a little bit of black at the base of each leaf and in the centers of the flowers. Now we get to the fun part, which is using the interference ink. So this is the floral background. This pinky color is Tropical Paradise. And you can see on the white part of the cardstock, it's that pink color. And then on the black part where we've inked, it is more of a purple metallic tone. When you tilt it in the light, it's got a little bit of a metallic iridescent shimmer to it that I absolutely love. I'm a sucker for anything that has an iridescent shine to it. So I'm going to use that same blending brush for all of those flowers and ink them all. I use separate brushes for each one of these colors just because the dye part of the pad is all different colors and the interference part of the pad is all different colors, and I just put a little label on my brushes to know exactly which one was used for which. You could, if you want, get as much ink as possible on a scrap piece of paper and reuse these brushes, and I've seen other people do it. I just prefer not to. So it's your choice what you want to do. For the greeny blue color here, it's called Summer Garden. It's going to show up green on the white part of the cardstock, and then on the black area where we've inked, it's going to have a blue iridescence to it. So once again, you'll see a touch of that color, but it really shines in when you tilt it in the light. And just like before, periodically through my ink blending, I'm going to take my soft brush or my soft cloth and I'm going to wipe off any excess ink. Once again, just to make sure that I don't get it on my hands and smear it. And I also don't know if it'll dry on the embossed background, but I don't want to take a chance. So easy enough to keep it clean and to wipe it off periodically as I'm going. And I love the way these inks look on the white background. They're a little bit it's just a different look from that black background. To be honest, I can't say which one I prefer more, but it's a really, really cool background. Because that background is a little bit bumpy, when I wipe it with that green ink, I get a slight green hue to it, which I absolutely love because it's a floral and it's probably kind of in a garden. I like that. So now we move on to the balloons background. So the first color I'm using here is Fruit Salad, and it's got kind of a corally color to it. All of these ones are the ones that I chose because the color they show up on black is a little bit of a gold iridescent. So they kind of coordinate together. They're not all exactly the same color on the black, but I chose them because they all go that kind of goldy color on the black. So I'm just picking and choosing which balloons I want to be which colors. I chose 3 here. You could have them all one color if you want, or you could do as many colors as you want. I wanted to keep the palette somewhat simple, so I just chose 3. And just like my floral background, periodically throughout here, I'll take my dry cloth and I'll just wipe off any excess ink that may have gotten on my embossed background. Once again, it's not going to stick because of that, or not going to stay because of that embossing. I just don't want a chance getting my fingers in it, smearing it, and moving it elsewhere. The next color I'm using here is Sapphire Gold, and it's a gorgeous blue color, once again with that gold iridescent shimmer when you tilt it in the light. I chose to put black all the way around my balloons, and you definitely can see that black outline. It definitely frames them. If you wanted, you could choose, say, where, if you wanted to have, say, a light source from the top and only put that black on the bottom and play around with that. I wanted it to be all the way around. I thought it would be a nice halo around there. But you could certainly play with which way you want the light to go and where you want that black to be. And I absolutely love the vibrancy of the dye part of these ink pads and how they show up on white. The colors are all absolutely gorgeous and vibrant, and it's perfect for these balloons. So once again, I have a different blending brush than I used for my coral color. If you wanted to use the same brushes, I would say start with the lightest one that is like lightest dye color, and then work your way darker to get as little contamination as possible, and then brush your brush off onto some scrap paper to get as much ink as possible off of there. So this third color here is called Crushed Velvet, and it's a gorgeous purple color with that gold iridescent shine on the black. And just like before, I'm going around, and this time I'm just basically doing all of the balloons that haven't been colored yet. When I do this, I try not to have 2 of the same color balloon together. Sometimes it doesn't work. Sometimes there's a couple right beside each other, like those 2 blue ones on there, but that is okay. It won't ruin a background or anything if you have 2 of the same color beside each other. So after I am done this, my piece that I embossed for my backgrounds here are 4 1/4 by 5 1/2. So I'm going to cut them down to 3 3/4 by 5 inches. And then I'm going to do a mat for them that is 4 inches by 5 1/4. So they'll all be framed nicely. And I like to do that trimming after I've done all of the inking, so then I can pick and choose exactly what I want to trim off. This also takes off that spot that or the edges that I had to use the tape to tape it down to the embossing folder. So here are my 2 backgrounds before we start to put everything together. I've cut black mats for around these pieces here, and I like to use those interference pads on the black so that I have backgrounds that coordinate perfectly. I'm also going to use some on my sentiment. These are pre-done sentiments from past projects. This particular one here is hot foiled with like a silver iridescent foil, and my other sentiment for my other card is one that was heat embossed but with the better press, and it's going to be perfect. I like to do that ink with it because I know it's going to match exactly perfect. If you happen to have a piece of solid cardstock that matches perfectly, absolutely you can use it. This way I don't have to put any guesswork or thinking in it, and I get a really cool colored cardstock that matches perfectly and is really quite unique. So once I have everything inked and foiled, or inked and dried, I can start gluing and layering everything together. I'm using some Barely Art glue. It's a nice liquid glue. I have it in a fine tip bottle, and it really only takes a few minutes for that glue to start grabbing and holding. I like using a liquid glue simply because it gives me a few moments to shimmy and move things around before that glue starts to set. And I do that for both of them. I like to put in a large acrylic block on there too while things are drying, so that that can hold everything down nice and flat, give it some good contact with the card base or the piece of cardstock below it, and make sure that my hands are free to work on the next step. I'm also using a little T ruler here. This one's from Simon Says Stamp. It's just going to help make sure that everything is nice and straight on my card. It's really quite helpful. It's got an edge that just kind of hooks onto the end of your card, so you know that it's on perfectly every time. So for the centers of my flowers, I'm using some nail gems, and I'm easily putting them on with that same liquid glue and a jewel picker. These are the nail gems that I've been using in the last few cards, and I really like them because they're just so tiny. They're perfect for things like this. For my balloons one, I'm going to put some on my background, and I'm going to use them in a few different sizes. Because these nail gems come in a few different sizes, I thought it would be perfect for the background of this card to use it kind of like confetti. It makes it look a little bit more party-like. So I started with the largest size, and I just placed it where I thought they would go well. Put some glue in a close spot to where I've placed my gem, and then put that gem in the glue. Now I'm going to put those larger ones away, and even these larger ones are still a little bit smaller than some of the ones that I've seen in the past. So they're still not very large. So I'm going to put a dot of glue somewhat close to those first gems and put the next size down there. And then after I do that, I'm going to put a dot of glue by some of those areas. After I did this, I thought I was only going to do this, and then I didn't like the fact that every single area there was gems. There was two. It was a little bit too even for me. So I put a third dot of glue by some of them, and then I scattered some other gems around just to kind of have the confetti or the gems or the jewels falling all over the place. And I really love how they look. These particular gems are kind of a plum color, so they go well with that purple. And then they have a little bit of a limey green tint or glow or shimmer to them. So it works perfectly with these iridescent inks. And then that jewel picker makes it so easy to pick them up and put them wherever I want them to go. You would have a really hard time using tweezers with these gems because they're just so tiny. They're hard to grab hold of. So this jewel picker is perfect for that. Easy to grab it. The only problem every once in a while is I put a little bit too much glue and it doesn't want to hold down on the card. But once again, it doesn't take too much to put it down. I let that completely dry, and here is the finished card. And you can see a little bit the shimmer in the light, especially with the balloons. You can see that goldy green shimmer. And I love the difference between that white background and that black background. I always love color with black, but it's really cool to see it with the light as well. If you have a favorite, pop it down in the comments below. I'm really curious to hear which background you like better. Thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate you being here. Have a fantastic day.